They're putting their faith into somebody. And when they don't do the, to your point earlier, micromanagement task to save us, then I've lost my faith in that person. But the role is not to save us, but rather to inspire us.
It's not somebody else's job to save you. It's not somebody else's job to give you money or to pick up your thing or to throw out the immigrants or whatever it is like that needs to be done. It's like you need to contribute to that in some way. And if you cannot contribute at the highest level, contribute at the level you can contribute. And that's always been the story of life.
You wrote a piece called Captains and Cowards, and so I'm guessing obviously Trump is sort of that warrior archetype that leads that captain charge, if you will. Then who are the cowards?
Well, the cowards are the people they're the ones who are committed to opting out and committed to calling everything a psyop. You know, the libertarians fit in this bucket, the conspiracy theorists fit in this bucket, all this sort of stuff. It's like the people who just think that, oh, well, no matter what we do, they're not going to let us win.
Tell us how Trump and the battle against Trump and the assassination attempt and all that sort of fits into this archetype and this point of culture that we're in.
Something happened that meant we didn't see his head blow up like a watermelon on TV. And it changed, it shifted the energy of not just the room, not just the country, but I think the whole world in a big way. Like something happened that became quite symbolic.
In order to take on, you know, the deep state, the administrative state, the blob, as people call it now, you probably needed that person. Like you couldn't take the polished Obama type person anymore. Does that have something to do with the archetype?
Trump, in many ways, is incompatible with the system. When the system is so corrupt, the only way to cause any level of change is to do something or have someone incompatible in place.
All right, Aleks Svetski, good friend and co-author with my book, UnCommunist Manifesto, and you've got a new book out that I really want to dig into, and I think it's super timely for where we're at sort of in this market economy, this market cycle, and really more like the political system and structure that we have going on today that I want to dig into. So a lot of really good information for those that are tuning in that I think will give us a roadmap for kind of how to see things and navigate things. And the book is Bushido of Bitcoin. And we're not going to talk so much about Bitcoin today, but the Bushido, this code, this culture upstream from politics, and how this relates to Trump, how this relates to the Democrat Party, and maybe a roadmap for how we can win. So I'm super excited about that, Aleks. So anyway, thanks for jumping on with me.
Dude, good to see you. It's been too long. I want to just say something quickly about the reason behind the word Bitcoin in the title of the book, because the book has nothing to do with Bitcoin, or very little to do with Bitcoin. In fact, you're not going to find anything about how Bitcoin works or why it's going to win or any of that sort of stuff. I believe we are on the precipice of a new socioeconomic paradigm. Like fundamentally, the one that we're living in at the moment is breaking down. Like, that doesn't matter where you look. Like, you cannot build a civilization on lies. You cannot build it on money printing. You cannot build it on hot air. You cannot build it on incompetence, right? So when you build that kind of a structure, it's going to fall apart. So I believe we're going to move towards a new socioeconomic paradigm, like something completely different that is incompatible with the old. And my bet is that the basis of that socioeconomic paradigm is going to be Bitcoin. Hence the name Bushido of Bitcoin. But like, just so people understand, it's not another history of money, Bitcoin standard, none of that stuff. This is a book about culture, about civilization, about virtue, about history, about humanity. That's the whole point of the book.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into the meat of this, because I know everybody's kind of hoping and chomping at the bit for this. So you said that culture is upstream from politics. Culture is upstream from politics. So we're talking about culture breaking down and how it's incompatible. And in the political spectrum, the often overused quote, decades where nothing seems to happen, and then days where decades seem to happen. I mean, we're literally witnessing a coup go down in the United States in real time in front of us. Same thing that we witnessed with the fall of the USSR, and we see in third world countries all the time. And we're seeing really this difference of Trump, who got this iconic photo, and the other side, if you will. So I think you'd written a piece called Captains and Cowards. Tell us how Trump and the battle against Trump and the assassination attempt and all that sort of fits into this archetype and this point of culture that we're in.
So I woke up to my wife, funny enough. We were in Europe, and it was like, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning, something stupid. And, she's like, someone tried to shoot Trump. Someone tried to shoot Trump. And you know, my wife Paloma, she's, you know, crazy. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I'm trying to sleep here. So anyway, I'll roll over and it's like, it's real. Someone tried to shoot him. And I just remember that day, like, one, just sort of being shocked that, you know, an attempt like that was made. Second, being just like wowed by the fact that he literally turned his head. Like, I don't know if you want to call it divine intervention, the wind, luck, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, something happened that meant we didn't see his head blow up like a watermelon on TV. And it changed, it shifted the energy of not just the room, not just the country, but I think the whole world in a big way. Like, something happened that became quite symbolic. But at the same time, I saw all these losers on Twitter, on Nostr, on Substack, and all this sort of stuff, you know, start with whether it's the conspiracy theories, like he planned someone to try and shoot him in the head and hit him in the ear, like, you know, stupidity like that. Or, you know, the classic person, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, you know, like, it's just left and right, it's all the same, and, you know, they sort of like opt out. Or, you know, the people talking about like, well, you know, don't you know that Trump did Operation Warp Speed, and, you know, how dare you like support him and everything like that. And I was just looking at this, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, these people are losers. Like, first of all, there is an opportunity to double down on a win here. Like, this is a symbolic, energetic shift, kind of like when Milei won, you know, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, or whatever. Like, there was a palpable shift in the energy of the culture, right? Like, people thought for the first time, hey, there's hope here. There's a different direction, right? This just happened now with Trump, but to I would argue, an even greater degree. But to the people, like, I wanted to write something to the people who are like detractors of, you know, Trump and talking about how he locked down the country and all this sort of stuff. And I said, do you not understand? And I did this through a mental experiment or a thought experiment. I said, let's think about what it takes to go into the average company. Let's say you're going into a cafe that's run poorly. How long do you think it would take you, just in a cafe where you've got full executive power as CEO, to turn the cafe around? If you've got like cooks, if you've got this and that, like, who do you fire? When do you get rid of the person? Like, how do you analyze for, you know, cultural fit and competence and all this sort of stuff? Like I said, once I sort of mapped it all out, you realize that a cafe would probably take a couple of months to turn around. And that's like maybe a cafe of 20 people. Scale that up to a business and an organization of 1,000 people where you've got a board, you've got a whole management team and all this sort of stuff. How long would it take you to turn a ship like that around? And we go through all the complexities, etc. That might take 6 or 12 months. Then I said, try do that with something the size of Facebook. If you had to go in tomorrow and be CEO of Facebook, how long would it take you to not only change the company, but to change public perception? Years, maybe?
Well,
and then I said, multiply it now exponentially by
the country.
By a country.
Yeah. I might just push back on that, only because Elon Musk seemed to push to turn Twitter around in the blink of an eye by just he let go of 80% of the workflow or work.
He did. The challenge there, though, with a country is you can't necessarily let go of 80% because not because you shouldn't, because obviously we should. It's that you're coming in to an apparatus which is specifically designed to resist fast change like that. It's not a company.
Right.
It's a government bureaucratic apparatus. So literally, the exponential difficulty is it's geometric.
Right.
Like it's practically impossible to do that. And this is what all the people with like really big comment muscles, they don't understand. Like, they've got comment muscles, but they don't have courage. Like, they're cowards. They're not captains.
Yeah.
And there's a big distinction there that matters.
Now, I was pretty interested in this because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but one, overall, over the last couple of years, you haven't really been that much into politics. I certainly did not. I think most people certainly would never have called you a Trump fan ever. But yet, you know, you're writing this book, you're thinking about culture, you're thinking about these shifts of energy and public perception, and now Trump seems to be sticking out to you as this like warrior archetype that we need at this point. Am I wrong? I mean, have you been a Trump fan, or you weren't a Trump fan, or what was it that shifted and you see this all of a sudden?
I mean, I think people forget that Trump was a business person before. Like, I respected Trump for a long time, and as a business person, he's a character. Yeah. and is a man of courage, fundamentally. He's not a politician. People sort of, project he's very different to Obama, right? Like, Obama is a polished politician. His life and career was politics. Mm-hmm. Trump is not a politician. Trump is a business person who is a great leader, and he's a great archetype, and he represents, like, tell me how many people can you just recognize from a silhouette?
Yeah.
He's one of the only people, so he's symbolic in that sense. And the way he behaved, like literally after being shot in the head, was to get up and give the crowd comfort. His leadership instinct came out straight away, and it wasn't planned. It wasn't, he thought for a second and be like, maybe I should get up and pump my fist. No, it was instinctual. And that, to me, says a lot about what I need to know with respect to a person's character and their leadership qualities, because the role of the president or the role of the leader of a country is not to do the things. It's to inspire others to do the things.
Yeah.
And this is what people sort of seem to forget. It's like, he could have fixed this, or he could have done that. His job's not to micromanage. Like, his job is to inspire the changes, to inspire you and I to be better,
yeah.
to have the energy and the wherewithal and the vitality to actually do the stuff.
Yeah. Now,
that's the role of every good leader.
I want to talk about this shift in energy. I think that's a really big deal, and where we take it from there, and how each of us could sort of help build that world that we want to see. But just jumping backwards just for a minute, a lot of criticism from Trump, and most of the Trump derangement syndrome, et cetera, really stems from the fact that he said mean things. He said really mean things about women, and he said really mean things about, Rosie O'Donnell, and he tweeted mean things, and he said mean things. And, I remember when he ran for president for the first time, I didn't like him, and because he seemed as somebody who couldn't hold their tongue, and they didn't have the capacity to know when to say things. I think if you're a little bit smarter and you pay attention, maybe he actually does know and he's actually using it in a way. But the point that I want to make or ask you about is just that seemed that he was like this boy from the Bronx in New York, street fighter, growing up probably. I mean, imagine dealing with real estate in downtown Manhattan, all the mobs you probably had to deal with, all that stuff. And so it raised this battle-hardened, very brash guy who says mean things and can't hold his tongue. But back to the archetype, it seemed like in order to take on, the deep state, the administrative state, the blob, as people call it now, you probably needed that person. Like, you couldn't take the polished Obama-type person anymore. Does that have something to do with the archetype?
100%. Like, you can't... this reminds me of Bitcoin in many ways. Like, Bitcoin's special because it's incompatible, right? From the philosophy of Bitcoin down to the technicals of Bitcoin. Like, in the modern banking system, we have accounts. In the Bitcoin system, we have UTXO sets. In the modern banking system, the account is owned by the bank. In Bitcoin, it's a bearer instrument. Like, you have a public-private key. Like, the paradigm is completely different. And that's what makes Bitcoin special, because it's incompatible. And Trump, in many ways, is incompatible with the system. He doesn't fit in. It's like it's a square in a circle, that's sort of been bashed in. And when the system is so corrupt, the only way to cause any level of change is to do something or have someone incompatible in place. And that's again, his role is to represent the archetype. His role is to be symbolic, not to actually do the stuff.
Yeah. Now, I've talked a lot about cycles and this big pendulum cycle that goes from centralization to decentralization. And I sort of peg the beginning of that pendulum shift back to like 2016 when Trump got elected. Brexit happened. Right. And there was a couple of these big keys where and Trump was that sort of disrespect or rejection of that establishment. And so, in addition to that, I've noticed the rise of a Jordan Peterson, the rise of the Andrew Tate, the rise of this masculine archetype who's, instead of saying, it's okay, it's not your fault, Jordan Peterson's like, dude, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, wipe your face off. And so I almost kind of seem like the energy has been shifting for a long time. And you had said culture is upstream from politics. So do you think it was sort of this cultural shift started happening, as I mentioned, with the Joe Rogans and these masculine role models, and then it kind of brought out the Trump archetype? Or is it the opposite of that?
No, I mean, these things happen simultaneously, right? Like there's always, I think, like a leading force in some capacity, but this has been bubbling away because I would call it in our blood memory. Like, we know for thousands of years, order has been established by the masculine. Like, in fact, order as a concept is masculine. Hierarchy is masculine. Sharp edges, defined borders, boundaries are masculine concepts. You know, we can trace all the way back to the French Revolution when the masculine order was actually inverted. That's when femininity as a concept, or feminism, I should say, as a concept took hold of civilization and started to decay it, in the sense that, not that women are bad, but that in a lack of order, you don't have freedom, you have chaos. And today what we've got is this vacuum of frame, this vacuum of authority, this vacuum of order, and in the process, you know, up is down, black is white, man is woman, you know, dumb is smart, ugly is beautiful, and everything's sort of inverted because nothing actually has any meaning. There's no hierarchy, there's no prioritization to any of it. So I think this stuff has been happening, and it's been coalescing around a particular theme for a reason, and it's because we're hungry for it. And, you know, yeah, you're right. Jordan Peterson started talking about it. Trump started talking about it. The Tates recently, all this sort of stuff. It's rising. And I would say that we have been the minority for the last decade or whatever. But in the last 6 months, 7 months, we've tipped the scales. We're no longer the minority. That's actually fundamentally shifted, almost like the momentum in a battle shifts on a dime. Like you study ancient battles, you study feudal battles, the momentum shifts on a dime. That's what happened with, you know, the great story, Homeric story of Troy, and, you know, the battle lust that Ajax felt shifted the energy of the war, and the whole thing moves in a different direction. That's where we are now. It's such an important point.
Yeah. You can trace that back to lots of wars. The Alamo in Texas is one of those things. And even though, unfortunately, the Alamo was lost and those people died, it was the shift of the energy that brought the U.S. into the war and caused that massive win against the Mexican military. Now, you wrote a piece called Captains and Cowards, and so I'm guessing, obviously, Trump is sort of that warrior archetype that leads that captain charge, if you will. Then who are the cowards?
Well, the cowards are the people who, there's many. The ones with overdeveloped comment muscles, as I talk about in the...
Everybody needs to have an opinion today, supposedly.
Correct. And, you know, so that is someone. So I kind of said in there, I gave him a challenge. I'm like, look, if you can do better, by all means, please, go and do it. Otherwise, shut the fuck up. The second people that are the cowards are the ones who are committed to opting out and committed to calling everything a psyop. You know, the libertarians fit in this bucket, the conspiracy theorists fit in this bucket, all this sort of stuff. It's like the people who just think that, oh, well, no matter what we do, they're not going to let us win, right? Like, that mentality drives me absolutely mental, because it's like, at that point, like, what are you even doing here? Like, just kill yourself now. Like, save some oxygen for the rest of us who actually want to go and, like, fight the fight. Like, otherwise, like, if you've lost before you even, like, started, like, why are you here? I just don't get it.
Wouldn't you say that's part of the plan, though, the demoralization?
Well, it is. And I think this is, whether it's part of the plan or whether it's like in these people's DNA, like I was on a podcast recently talking about how you look at the samurai class and you know, Western Christendom during the medieval stage, like the knights were bred differently. You know, the peasant didn't become a knight. The knight had a different constitution, physically speaking, mentally speaking, biologically speaking, right? They were a different class of people. And I think, unfortunately, you know, there's probably people like you and I and like people like Trump, for example, that have warrior blood in us in some sense. We are the ones who are not willing to, for example, bend the knee, and we are willing to go out and fight, even if it's hopeless. Like somebody sort of like pushed back on my message on Twitter, and they said, but what if you're wrong, Aleks? What if you're wrong? And I said, what if I'm fucking right? Like, that matters more. And you know what? If I am wrong or if I do lose, at least I was in the fight. Like, at least I got in the arena.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're just tweeting on Twitter. Congratulations.
It seems like there's a lot of stuff that done demoralization. I was actually on a podcast earlier before we jumped on this one, and I actually talked about that. We were talking about in regards to finance and retirement and savings and whatnot. And right, most of what we've been taught through formal education, you know, school and formal education, continuing education, is meant to seemingly to demoralize us. And by setting these big unattainable goals that, well, we can't obtain. And so then why bother? And so part of even the fact that we're even talking about the president is one of those pieces where I can't change the two-party system. My vote for president doesn't even count. Why even bother? But like at the same time, I can change the vote in my city council or my county. I could actually make real change, but I'm demoralized because I looked at the wrong target. And you might also say the same about retirement. Well, work your crappy job, put your money into index funds, save for 40 years, and hopefully there's enough purchasing power left that you don't run out of money. So like, why even bother? Versus like, and we were talking about on the podcast, like, dude, most people could just start buying real estate right now and probably be retired in 5 years or less than 10. And that's something you could do, but I'm demoralized. And so I see that happening a lot over and over and over. And if you look back, and you and I wrote the book, The UnCommunist Manifesto. If you look back through a lot of communist literature, and actually, I think it was like in 1964, there was a Congress hearing where they were on communism, and there was like 48 things that the communists wanted to do to bring down the United States. And one of those was to demoralize. I think it's even in Rules for Radicals, and it's like demoralize the enemy, right? And it's like, so it seems like a tactic, and it seems like it's been working, I guess.
Well, it's been working, but that's why I was talking about the warrior archetype before. Is it works on some?
Yeah.
Like it works on those who either don't have the warrior gene, or don't have that wherewithal within them. And I'm sorry, that sounds like elitist, it sounds harsh, it sounds all of that sort of stuff, but I fundamentally believe it. Some of us were not demoralized by this. Or maybe some of us went through periods of demoralization, but you know what we did? We picked ourselves up and we did something about it. Like, this is why I don't believe in things like depression. Depression is not something you have. It's not a syndrome. It's not a fucking label. Depression is something you do. And you get depression, or you do depression, by focusing on the things you can't control, focusing on the things that don't matter, focusing on everything that's wrong. So like depression is literally an act, right? Whereas if you direct your mind, and if you understand that you are, you're an agent, you're in control, you have some level of control over how you direct all of these things, you can remoralize yourself. And it's up to you. It's not up to, Trump for that matter, to do that. Like he's a symbol. He's out there. He remoralized himself really quickly after being shot in the ear. His example should be an example for the rest of us. But yeah,
would you say also part of it is like these people who are demoralized and what does it matter, blah, blah, blah. What it seems like maybe a big mistake that's happening is they're putting their faith into somebody. Trump or RFK or whatever, Kamala now, they're going to save us. And when they don't do the, to your point earlier, micromanagement task to save us, then I've lost my faith in that person. But the role is not to save us, but rather to inspire us.
That's always been the role of a leader. So like you and I have both run businesses. What does a good business owner do? Well, first of all, he doesn't do everything himself.
Right.
He finds good people, and then he sets the pace, he leads, he delegates, he trusts, he encourages, he trains, he does all of these things. And that's essentially the role of a leader. And I'm really harsh with people who are even demoralized. I just don't care anymore. I'm done with that shit, because it's your job to do something. Like it's not somebody else's job to save you. It's not somebody else's job to give you money or to pick up your thing or to throw out the immigrants or whatever it is like that needs to be done. It's like you need to contribute to that in some way. And if you cannot contribute at the highest level, contribute at the level you can contribute. Right. And that's always been the story of life.
Or at least get out of the way.
Or exactly, get the fuck out of the way if you're not going to do
some of it is like a psychosis. During the pandemic, Dr. Matthias Desmond's mass formation psychosis kind of took over. I recently did another interview with somebody, and we were talking about the psychosis that's happening today. And really, it's where like 30% of the people are just going to go along with it, whatever. 30% of the people are going to reject it, whatever. And then you have this sort of middle 40% that you fight over. And that was sort of the basis of that mass formation psychosis. 30% just went along with the pandemic, just whatever. Lead me to the way, Pied Piper. 30% were absolutely never going to take that. And you can see that sort of in these numbers, these vaccination numbers. And then there was that middle piece. Do you think that plays in? You're talking about like a warrior gene. That may seem a little bit too deep for most people, but maybe it's sort of the culture that they're raised in and like which groups they identify with. And maybe it's more of like a psychological kind of process and just kind of where they're at in that.
Well, I mean, think about what leadership is. Leadership is fundamentally something that is done by the few, right? Because like not everybody can lead,
Right.
which means the responsibility rests on the leader to do something that others who are watching can be potentially inspired by, right? So that middle 40% that you're discussing, look, I would argue that most people have a good heart. Most people want good for the world, for themselves, for their family, all that sort of stuff. Most people are, we're not completely, biologically retarded, right? Like, we've got good people. And, I guess to your point, some are just not built to be the tip of the spear, right? Like they are meant to be more the inertia that comes after it. But they can be great supporters. And this happens in a business, right? Like some people are fantastic CEOs and, what you would call entrepreneurs. And some people are fantastic intrapreneurs.
Right.
They work well within the business and they have this supporter archetype. And they're the ones we need to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, leader, and unfortunately today, what leaders think they're supposed to do is boss people around. But leaders lead, and more usually by example, and really more importantly, they encourage people to follow them, not by coercion, like you have to do this, but like it's so inspiring that people just want to follow, right? And that's the difference. Back to your point about being entrepreneurs in business. It's always up to the leader, the founder, to set what they call the culture, to set that tone for the business. There's a saying that says the fish stinks from the head down, and so it's like the leader is going to set the tone for the rest of that. Now let's talk about let's wrap this, move this into the next part, which is you said like the tide is turning, the energy has shifted, and it sounds like that's sort of like this monumental or very important moment in time where if we can latch onto that shift of energy and push that energy shift forward, maybe massive change could happen. But at the same time, if we don't latch onto that piece of energy and help kind of get it over that ledge, then maybe it falls apart and we go back the other way. I mean, what's the take on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to use an analogy, imagine in a battle, once again, you've got this cavalry charge and you've penetrated the first line of defense. If you maintain that momentum, you actually have an opportunity to make it through. And I think about the battle of Gaugamela with Alexander when he first faced Darius back in 300 BC. It was the second battle of Isis, and it was incomprehensible. Like you had the Persian army with 500,000 people, maybe up to 1 million, versus the Macedonians with 40,000, like a fraction of that. But Alexander pulled his primary cavalry, his companions, which were the best of his men, his generals, and they formed an arrow and they pierced right through the first line of defense, the second line of defense, the third line of defense, and they went straight for Darius. Because Alexander knew that the only way to win this battle with those kind of odds was to go straight for the head. And that applies in all things. When you're in business, when you've got that slight edge, when you're in a boxing ring, when you've got that slight edge, you've got the guy just off balance, you need to double down right then. Because if Alexander pulled his horses back, the cavalry charge back, right at the moment of, he got scared from the second line of defense, he would have lost the battle right then. And that's exactly where we are. And it's really frustrating, in fact, on the with call it conservatives or the side of sanity, is sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We sabotage ourselves by trying to place compassion before the follow through of justice. There's a quote that I've got here. It's easy when winning to forget what happened and what is continuing to happen in the world. And I don't see this as a victim, but more that we cannot let compassion get in the way too soon, when what's needed is the rigid stick of justice and the sharp thorns of vengeance to really teach them a lesson, right? So it's good. Like, now's the time when, hey, we're going to have to be mean. I'm sorry. But it's time to actually take civilization back, and we're going to have to charge right through.
Yeah. There was this quote I put up on Instagram a couple days ago from Robert Greene, and it said, if a sword is always sheathed, it will become rusty. The blade will dull, and people will think as much of its owner. And I said, behavior holds much more credibility than just fiery words, right? And I said, become a weapon capable of great and mighty things and demonstrate it often. So you got to push through. I mean, otherwise you're old and rusty and you're weak. And so obviously that's not a call to violence, but as Jordan Peterson would say, like, be capable of violence. Otherwise, being weak is no virtue. I'm curious your take then. So, I mean, it's a good analogy using the war analogy. So the energy has shifted. We have to kind of push forward. So then what's the challenge for everybody listening here? Like, if we want to have that world where accountability is back and justice is served and maybe a more freer world that's based off of beauty and meritocracy, I mean, what's the charge? What's the call to action? What are people going to do about that?
I can't answer that for individual people. All I can do is say it in such a way. It's like, find that which fires you up and find that with which you can contribute. And again, I used to be this raging libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, all this kind of crap, and I've thrown that out the window fundamentally. I think it's all bullshit. Politics will always exist, and there's that saying which I found out Trotsky actually stole it. The one where it's like, you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. That actually goes back to Pericles. Trotsky stole it and pretended it was his. Typical communist, right? But if you're interested in politics, and as you kind of said earlier, if you're not able to play at the higher level, play at the local level. There is much, 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 much help needed at the local level to gain back control and power in the areas that matter, because the local is going to affect you more than the state or the federal, right? So get into that. Get into business.
Yep.
Lead your peer group, your friends group, like build a men's circle. Like if you're a man, if you're a woman, build a women's circle and start to like reestablish rituals and rites of passage and all this sort of stuff. Like that's the stuff that matters. And for the love of God, like get off. If all you're going to do on social media is like just comment, like get off it.
Yeah.
Like stop being a consumer and start being a producer. Like so the same principles apply, I guess, across all of these things.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson recently was in Los Angeles. I was able to take my daughter up there and see him. It was really, really good, as he is always. And he's been talking about for like the last year at least, like the story of Exodus. And how he says that the story of Exodus is really the story of life, everybody's life. But for what I'm talking about specifically, he talked about how the Israelites lived in Egypt under tyranny, the tyranny of the Pharaoh, and they were slaves. And you think of tyranny and slaves as sort of the same thing, but they're different, because the slave mentality is such that you can't think for yourself. You're always just told what to do. And so because of that, you're not able to think for yourself, then you can never take any agency. And so when the Israelites were freed and they moved over into first the desert, they fought, they bickered, they didn't know what to do. And they had to come up with a new form of government, this hierarchical form of government that was broken into smaller groups, and they went into like a bigger group. And he talked about how anarchy is not the opposite of tyranny, because you always are going to need that governance structure. But the only way it can work, if it's not tyranny, is that each person has to have personal responsibility for themselves. Because the slave doesn't. The slave is like, I have no responsibility, just tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. And so the only way we can have that constitutional republic or whatever type of free, individualistic, but yet still a system of governance, and is if everybody were to step up and take that personal responsibility. And then he goes on to say that if we don't, we're too busy, then a tyrant will take it every single time.
Well, there's actually a really important point here. So it reminds me of an article I wrote called Responsibility Go Up Technology a little while ago. And I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And what I said in there is, if you want to take away someone's freedoms, you start by taking away their responsibilities.
Right, which is back to the demoralization we talked about earlier, maybe.
Well, it is related, right? So, like, the more, I guess, responsibilities you move from someone, the less meaning they have in life, and I guess lack of meaning, lack of you become demoralized. But this is a really important point: is that you don't taking away someone's freedom overtly initiates a pushback. But if you slowly take away people's responsibility, take away their responsibility for education, take away their responsibility for their health, take away their responsibility for the money they hold, take away their responsibility for the governance structures that they abide by, take away their responsibility for the roads they drive, all this sort of stuff. You slowly strip away responsibility. In a not so distant time, what you'll discover really quickly is that now you don't have freedom over those things. You are a dependent, which is another word for slave. Dependency is on the pathway to slavery. So responsibility, I talk about this in the book as well, is freedom is a value. Freedom is something you want and something you want to feel, but it's not a virtue. The difference between a value and a virtue is an act. So a virtue is, like I said earlier, it's a mixture of a behavior and a principle, right? So it's a principled act. Responsibility is the virtue that gives rise to freedom, the value. And it's not the other way around. And this is where, again, libertarians, their entire, mental model is around freedom, 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 freedom. And they maybe talk about responsibility 2% of the time.
Right.
Like the equation needs to be the other way around. It needs to be 80% of a discussion around responsibility, 20% of a discussion around the feeling of freedom. Because that's the end that we want to experience, but you don't get it without the payment of responsibility up front.
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff, man. Great stuff. And back to, the leaders and the inspiration piece. When I was flying back from Australia a couple weeks ago, I watched The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise on the plane back.
The greatest.
Yeah.
I just watched it the other night, actually.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I've always loved that culture because it's based on honor, at least the story that we're told anyway, right? But based.
No, it is. And in fact, it's even more than what you saw in the movie.
Yeah. So Bushido of Bitcoin, it's not just about Bitcoin, it's about the Bushido, it's about the code, and meant to inspire you to go live that better life. Trump is that representation, this warrior archetype, and we have to seize onto that moment, take that energy, push forward. So I love it for right now. Bushido of Bitcoin, we're going to link to that down in the show notes down below. Aleks, anything else you want to say to close this out?
I think what I'll say is the idea that somebody or something is just going to fix everything for you is false. And this, I don't know how many of your listeners are Bitcoiners. I assume many of them, if they've been listening to you for a while, but there's this saying in Bitcoin, which is Bitcoin fixes this. And in many ways it's true, because if you establish a new economic framework, you downstream of that potentially have the opportunity to fix a bunch of things. But let me leave people with one mental model to think about. It's this. In the current paradigm, in the current socioeconomic paradigm that we live in, as I mentioned earlier, the one where it is built on lies and incompetence and DEI and all this sort of stuff. In this paradigm, in order to win, you have to lie, cheat, steal, politic, be a parasite of some sort, right? Nancy Pelosi is doing way better financially than you and I, right? Yeah. Way better. So that's the game you need to be in. Now, the problem with that game is that it decays society because everyone is incentivized to be a parasite, so they leech instead of build or produce or create anything. If and when, and I believe it's more of a when, we move on to a new socioeconomic paradigm, something like Bitcoin, where institutionalized lying, cheating, theft, all that sort of stuff is made much harder. We require a new set of virtues, like a new playbook to operate by. And in my opinion, virtues transcend everything. Virtues transcend beliefs. Virtues transcend religion. Virtues transcend, culture. Virtues transcend all of these things. Because I can guarantee you, go back and read the stories of the Crusades, particularly around the time of Saladin, is the Christians and the Muslims, despite having completely different beliefs, were able to have respect for one another for large periods of time because they behaved with honor. So you can recognize, every single culture, every single belief system, every single religion recognizes courage. They recognize integrity. They recognize respect. This was one of the things that was profound as I researched the book, is that you look at the warrior class in Japan, the samurai, completely disconnected to the warrior class in the West, the knights of Christendom, somehow developed in the East, the Bushido, and in the West, chivalry, whose virtues mapped precisely on top of each other, which virtues also mapped precisely on top of the Romans and the Greeks and all of these great cultures who built the greatest civilizations afterwards. So if there's something we must focus on, in my opinion, it's these key virtues. What are the ones that are timeless? And we don't do it in such a way, it's like, the leftist, typical, oh, let's just make up something new. There's 37 genders now. No. We go back and we look at the past. We look at what's traditional. And the true definition of tradition is not the past, but that which does not pass, right? It's a very important distinction.
Time-tested.
So we take that and we project it forward, and we find where the greatest overlap is. And for me, that's virtues such as justice, courage, compassion, honor, integrity, responsibility, excellence, duty, loyalty, restraint, self-control. So that's what I explore in the book, plus a bunch of other things. It's a way longer book than what we read. I think it's 130,000 words. And your mind will be blown, I promise you. Like in each virtue, I open it up with the Japanese etymology and the English etymology, and I look at how the pictograms of a completely different language resemble the essence of a word, where in English, I go back through the English, Latin, Proto-Indo-European structure of the words, and like, for example, excellence in both of these disparate languages with different roots means to separate oneself from the plane via the mountain. So to climb a mountain, to reach, to separate oneself. So the very fundamental nature of these words. We did a bit of that in the UnCommunist Manifesto. So I do loads of etymology, all this sort of stuff. And I encourage people to like dig on these things, because this is the most important period, I believe, of modern history. Like, this is our time. Like, and we fundamentally have a chance and an opportunity to shift the entire course of history. And it's not going to happen just because Bitcoin. It's going to happen because of what we do with the Bitcoin. And it's very important. Like, humans are the ones that drive this. We're the tip of the spear.
Yeah, love it. All right, well, good stuff. Aleks, we're going to wrap it up with that. We'll link to all that stuff down in the show notes down below. Highly recommend you go check that out. And that's it. Thanks for joining me.